Tibet has been hit with 7 earthquakes in a single day as natural disasters continue to batter China. We also have an in-depth look at the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston, and the U.S. College Board is being called out for its ties to China. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. Tibet was hit by 7 earthquakes in a single day on July 23rd, mainly ranging from 3.6 to 4.8 magnitude, but with the highest being a 6.6 magnitude earthquake. This follows 2 recent earthquakes in Tibet and 1 in Xinjiang. In Jiangsu province, meanwhile, homes were damaged by level 8 winds. Officials in Xiangshui County of Yangcheng said more than 200 homes were damaged. 21 people were also injured. And power lines were also damaged in some areas, and videos showed doors of homes were broken and car windows were cracked by the powerful winds. And meanwhile, with the new coronavirus, the CCP virus, and the new outbreaks in China, an individual confirmed to have contracted the virus reportedly had contact with 572 people. And among these 572, 12 were found to be asymptomatic. The city is under partial lockdown. Currently, the city's metro station is closed, and 4 stops of 2 bus lines are temporarily canceled. Locations including movie theaters, a museum, cultural center, and sports stadium are also closed. And in other news, CCP leader Xi Jinping has finally made a public appearance on July 21st. It was during a symposium with business leaders. Now, Xi hadn't made a public appearance for around 20 days prior to this, and other top-level CCP leaders have similarly seemed to have disappeared. Forums like the one Xi has appeared at, however, have in the past been used by CCP leaders to break rumors, so-called. And his appearance also does not dispel beliefs that he and other top-level CCP members may have left Beijing to escape the new CCP virus outbreaks happening there. Now, similar anomalies have been seen with other top CCP officials recently, as we've shown in previous episodes. These CCP officials who have not really made any public appearances. And in this forum, this recent one, Xi emphasized the need to stimulate the vitality of the Chinese market, to promote entrepreneurship, and to urge enterprises to play a greater role in better development. Now, high-level CCP officials have recently attended these entrepreneurial symposiums within the last 8 days, and the meeting hosted by Xi Jinping on July 21st included state-owned businesses of the CCP and several foreign companies. Regarding Xi Jinping's reference to internal economic cycle, which he's referring to, analysts believe that the CCP does not want foreign companies to leave China for the sake of keeping his political power, and he also desperately wants to keep the CCP state enterprises up and running. However, the current economic decline in mainland China is inevitable based on the current appearance of things. Now, companies attending the forum on July 21st included Chinese state-owned company Hikvision and Japan's Matsushita Electric. Now, the CCP intensively holds seminars for entrepreneurs and then mentions, quote, internal economic circulation. This could have a few different meanings within China. One, as we mentioned before, maybe the need to keep these companies in China, as Xi Jinping is likely trying to do. The other big part of this is internal circulation of money. They want to have a middle class in China. They want money to circulate internally, not to have people either save money or spend it abroad. And so for right now, this is a major focus of the CCP. Also, in relation to the U.S. government ordering the Chinese consulate in Houston to shut down, President Donald Trump said during a press conference on July 22nd that, quote, it's always possible that more of the CCP's diplomatic outposts in the United States could be closed. President Donald Trump said during a press conference on July 22nd this.
As far as closing additional embassies, it's always possible.
And now for the broader stories for today. Now, as reported yesterday, the Chinese consulate in Houston was ordered to close by the U.S. government on July 22nd, and it was given 72 hours to do so. Now, I wanted to give a bit more detail on why this may have happened. Now, official details are somewhat slim. A State Department spokeswoman, Morgan Ortagus, sent a statement to the Epoch Times, which said, quote, the United States will not tolerate the PRC, People's Republic of China's, violations of our sovereignty and intimidation of our people. And also said, quote, we have directed the closure of PRC Consulate General Houston in order to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information. Now, Ortagus also pointed to laws that diplomats should respect local laws and should not interfere in the internal affairs of the host country. Now, based on this statement, We can assume the Chinese consulate in Houston was taking actions that endangered U.S. intellectual property, the private information of U.S. citizens, and was involved in activities that interfered with the U.S. internal affairs, at least based on those statements. Now, for the Chinese consulates, none of these practices would actually be unusual. The Chinese regime is known to run subversive operations out of its consulates. In my own investigations, actually, I've exposed how Chinese consulates were directly involved in campaigns to surveil and even violently suppress Chinese dissidents on American soil. Now, among the operations run through these Chinese consulates are United Front work for espionage and subversion, and also political warfare work through the CCP's liaison department. Now, the United Front, this United Front Work Department, often works through Chinese associations typically found in Chinatowns, and aggressively uses these networks to compromise local officials, subvert local institutions, and to also surveil and harass local Chinese communities. The consulates also finance and direct the Chinese student and scholar associations at universities that work to push the CCP's agendas on college campuses. Now, when there were violent attacks on the streets of New York by groups tied to the Chinese Tongs, targeting dissidents from 2008 and sporadically onward, even somewhat now, the then New York Chinese Consulate General, Peng Ke-yu, was recorded in a phone interview admitting his involvement in encouraging the Tongs in their attacks. One woman I spoke with in my own reporting was a 55-year-old Taiwanese woman, and a U.S. citizen, notably, with a son in the U.S. Army. She shared something that many Chinese residents in New York also told me. They are threatened by the CCP on American soil. Chen said, quote, "They say they can make me disappear." And this isn't just in New York, or even just in the United States. This actually takes place in just about every country of the world, and these operations have been ongoing. A former Chinese diplomat, for example, Cheng Yonglin, who defected to Australia in 2005, exposed operations that he was actually directly involved with at the Chinese consulate in Sydney, Australia, and he also released several documents from that consulate to prove his claims. Chen explained that the CCP was using its consulates to control Chinese language media overseas, to use local front groups like I mentioned, to carry out its operations in foreign soil, to influence government officials in the host countries, American officials, Australian officials, you name it, and to intimidate Chinese dissidents living abroad, as I also encountered they were doing. Now, he told the Epoch Times back in 2007, quote, "The control of the overseas Chinese community has been a consistent strategy of the Chinese Communist Party and is the result of painstaking planning and management for dozens of years. It's not just in Australia. It is done this way in other countries like the US and Canada too." Now, in the recent order on the CCP's consulate in Houston, Senator Marco Rubio emphasized this point as well. He wrote on Twitter, quote, "China's consulate in Houston is not a diplomatic facility. It is a central node of the Communist Party's vast network of spies and influence operations in the United States. Now that building must close and the spies have 72 hours to leave or face arrest." He also said this in an interview with Fox.
It's kind of the central node of a massive spy operation, commercial espionage, defense espionage, also influence agents to try to influence Congress.
And meanwhile, the CCP is pushing a new program in academic control through China under the banner of the, quote, Four Histories. Chinoscope reports that, quote, the Chinese Communist Party has once again launched a brainwashing campaign. It is requiring its members and school students to study the Four Histories, which refers to the, quote, history of the CCP, the history of New China, the history of the reform and opening up, and the history of socialist development. It adds that official state media have pushed a new political drive for the Four Histories as a, quote, key task to promote in colleges and universities. It also says this, quote, East China Normal University in Shanghai has incorporated the campaign materials in the school's seminar series so that these students will be learning and also preaching to people outside of the campus. And so what are these four histories again? It is this, the history of the CCP. And what is the history of the CCP? This is the reinterpretation of Chinese history in accordance with the CCP's own narratives. Instead of the history of a totalitarian regime that destroyed Chinese culture during things like the Cultural Revolution, during other movements like it, that under Mao Zedong alone killed 50 million to 70 million Chinese people, and that continues as we speak to carry out atrocities against the Chinese people. When it talks about the history of New China, this is a political slogan of the CCP. It claims there would be no new China without the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party claims ownership, claims responsibility for the technological developments that pretty much took over every country in the world. It says this is done because of the CCP, not because of something that happened in the broader world. When it talks about the history of the reform and opening up, it's talking about Deng Xiaoping and the narrative that the Chinese Communist Party uplifted the Chinese people out of poverty. What did it really do? Under the Chinese Communist Party, there was no such thing really as independent business. Everything was controlled by the military. When Deng Xiaoping created this new reform and opening up, he took out those, say, state-run businesses from the military, created the State Council, and made these semi-private, semi-state-run businesses. The Chinese Communist Party still controls them. Many academics, even in the West, believe the CCP's narrative on this. The Chinese Communist Party claiming that it liberated the Chinese people from poverty, that it uplifted them, is equivalent to a person holding someone's head underwater and when they lift them out of the water claiming they saved them from drowning. All the CCP did was lifted some of its own totalitarian laws that were suppressing the Chinese people, merely let go of some of those, and the Chinese people rebounded to some extent. That's what the CCP did. And when it comes to the history of socialist development, this is the CCP talking about socialism with Chinese characteristics, its own brand of the communist system that it has instituted in China and is now trying to spread around the world. In Hong Kong, meanwhile, also on this issue of academia, the CCP is forcefully expanding its programs for academic control. The Wall Street Journal is reporting this, quote, "Teachers who backed anti-government protests in the city by taking to the streets or supporting the demonstrators on social media are being reprimanded and in some cases fired as China's Communist Party increasingly moves to stamp out dissent." Again, the CCP's narratives on Chinese history and its destruction of Chinese culture during the Cultural Revolution is something it is trying to, say, rebrand for the Chinese people. It is trying to find ways to justify its abuses of the Chinese people, saying that it was necessary to do that the killing of, again, close to 50 million to 70 million Chinese people under Mao Zedong alone was somehow necessary, and that the Chinese Communist Party was somehow justified in doing so. This is the narrative the CCP feeds to people. This is the narrative it is pushing in the West in order to justify its own totalitarian nature, in order to justify its abuse of the Chinese people. Part of its narrative controlled on this is what it calls a century of humiliation. And what is it? It is the rebranding of the story of China as being a country that was facing humiliation, say lost wars and so on, and where the Chinese people were cornered by the world and helpless, and the Chinese Communist Party came down as the great savior that uplifted them out of that. This is the narrative it feeds to its own people, and it's also the narrative taught to many academics even in the West. Many of them believe this. And again, this is used to justify its foreign aggressions and also used to, say, dissuade criticism against the CCP. Because many academics in the West, many people, say even military leaders sometimes, even in the United States, believe this narrative. And what the Chinese Communist Party uses this for is they say that we are afraid of losing face, and if you humiliate us, it brings back all those bad feelings of the century of humiliation, and it's offensive. And so many academics, many different leaders are afraid of criticizing the Chinese Communist Party or the totalitarian communist leaders of the country, who have been the greatest abusers of the Chinese people, very likely in history, just based on numbers. And so what are we seeing here? The Chinese Communist Party is reinstituting these narratives. It is doubling down on these narratives. It is increasing the spread of these narratives within its own borders. And it's also pushing these narratives abroad. The Chinese Communist Party, very likely through this, is trying to reinstitute some of its own holds on power to justify its own rule. And also in related news to this, in the United States, the College Board, which develops the SAT test materials, is being called out for its ties to the CCP's Confucius Institutes. The National Pulse published an exclusive story on this, and it says that the U.S. College Entrance Exam Board is, quote, helping to embed Chinese Communist Party-funded Confucius Institutes in American high schools, granting the Chinese government the ability to dictate what is taught in classroom. It states that the College Board, which, quote, receives hundreds of millions of dollars from the U.S. Department of Education, offers a Chinese guest teacher program for K-12 institutions in partnerships with the Confucius Institutes, the CCP-funded controversial operation that purports to be a language and culture initiative. Every year, it says, the program serves hundreds of K-12 schools and districts nationwide and reaches tens of thousands of U.S. students. And it even quotes from a Chinese state-run report in China Daily, one of the CCP's main state-run news outlets, where College Board President David Coleman praises Hanban, which is behind the Confucius Institutes, stating this, quote, "Hanban is just like the sun. It lights the path to develop Chinese teaching in the U.S. The College Board, this organization, is the moon. I am so honored to reflect the light that we've gotten from Hanban." And so what's happening here? The Chinese Communist Party is paying U.S. schools and universities to host these programs. The CCP gives them money to host these programs. In other words, the CCP goes to colleges, goes to different schools, even K-12 programs, and tells these universities and schools, "We will pay you money if you let us teach these programs at your schools." Sometimes this may even include a separate building that the CCP will pay for and run on the campus. The Chinese Communist Party then does language and culture programs. And just like we just mentioned, with these 4 histories, this is the culture that they are teaching in these schools. And the CCP also has altered much of the Chinese language, and it's its altered version of the Chinese language that it also teaches at these schools. It means that kids being taught at these schools, even college kids, who become future Chinese linguists, for example in government, intelligence agencies, military, its businesses, so on, they have been indoctrinated, and they are being indoctrinated with the Chinese Communist Party's narratives and worldviews. So that when they go into these positions and you think they're China experts, what they're promoting is something in the interest of the CCP, because it's the CCP's narratives that have shaped their views of China. Meanwhile, in the news on the Chinese economy, the local markets experienced a boom after the state-run media pushed a campaign to lure foreign investment. And while the boom has now slowed, and many institutions have even warned about it because it was a boom, there are some interesting anomalies now taking place. Reports are now saying that while the markets are allegedly doing well, some of China's richest tech billionaires are selling off their shares. Why would they be doing that? And while there's an alleged surge in the property market, rents are falling. And this is while there are floods in 27 Chinese provinces, there are various lockdowns still for this virus, and there are other disasters. The Chinese Communist Party is struggling to keep its supply chains flowing. So what do we have here? While the Chinese Communist Party is claiming that it has a financial boom, and even many Western news outlets have been reporting this, just parroting what the CCP is saying, and because they're parroting this, investors are actually pouring their money into China. What is really happening here? Well, let's look at a few points on this. Why would Chinese tech billionaires be selling off their shares? We could look at the recent ban on the sale of chips to Huawei, for example. And we can also look at various actions being taken against Chinese companies such as ByteDance, which runs TikTok. The Chinese Communist Party's entire high-tech industry is under assault right now. If they say, for example, Huawei is no longer able to push 5G, for example, this means that one of the core components of the One Belt, One Road initiative is disabled. If the Chinese Communist Party's apps and its different products in the international software and technology markets get hit or even banned from different countries, what does that mean for the Chinese high-tech industries? Well, just the ban on the sale of chips to Huawei alone could be something that very much cripples the Chinese high-tech economy, because a lot of its products cannot function without these chips. The Chinese Communist Party, its various companies, are not able to develop modern generation chips by themselves. They import them from countries like the United States, South Korea, and Taiwan. Without these chips, the Chinese Communist Party and its various companies cannot manufacture current generation tech products. They need these chips. And so taking away these chips, I've done the equivalent like this before. Imagine, for example, you poured all your money into developing iPhone apps, and suddenly you're no longer allowed to use the iPhone. What value are the apps without the phone? And in the same light, these different Chinese high-tech products are very much nothing without these advanced chips. It's like selling, for example, an iPhone 5 when you're dealing with a market that has the iPhone 11. It is a technological product that is several generations behind. And when it comes to technology in international markets, you need to be close to the cutting edge at least to even compete. And another big question on this is how much damage will the floods and landslides cause to local real estate? We saw, for example, that real estate costs are going down even though the CCP claims there's a boom in its real estate market. Now, when it comes to these floods, one of the big issues they're facing, what they call tofu buildings. When there were different earthquakes in China, different people talked about this. A lot of locals in China were concerned about it because they found that local officials had embezzled funds when it came to construction. The buildings were so weak, the construction was so weak that people showed videos where they could take their thumbs and scrape it off. And we've seen pictures and videos of Chinese buildings collapsing because of this. For example, even right now as we speak, one of the largest buildings in China currently has leaks taking place just about through the entire building. And this building that was the pride and joy of the CCP is now being made fun of by Chinese netizens because they know about the shoddy construction techniques that are a result of the political corruption in the country. Now, taking this into broader context, what does this mean for areas that are suffering heavy flooding where these buildings are going to have water damage in addition to that? What does that mean for local real estate? What would the value of these homes be when they already, for example, might have had problems with, say, construction, when they have water damage in addition to that, and very severe water damage in some cases? Even in Shanghai, even in Wuhan, even in some of the major cities in China, they have floods right now. What does that mean for real estate? And again, when it comes to news of the Chinese market rebounding, we can look at potential issues of income in China. Now, locals have been out of work for months with the lockdowns, with this virus, with little or no financial help from authorities. This is now being followed by additional lockdowns and also natural disasters. Now, Chinese people who just went through these previous lockdowns, who know that they're not going to have a way to pay rent, pretty much. They understand this. Now they're going into new lockdowns. They see this looming on the horizon. What are they going to do? Are they going to go buy products? Are they going to go blow money at restaurants? Or are they going to keep that money in case they need it to pay rent because they did not receive any relief previously? And this is in addition to other countries making efforts to pull supply chains and manufacturing out of China. Japan and India are even paying companies to leave China. What does this mean for local manufacturing? What does this mean for jobs? What does this mean for supply chains? What does this mean for the companies that are the backbone of the Chinese economy? Well, across the board, manufacturing, high-tech industries, what do all these factors mean for them? And what does this tell us about the real financial situation in China? Not what Chinese state media are telling people, and not what a lot of media in the United States are parroting. What does this really tell us about the state of the Chinese economy? Now, with that said, folks, again, we broadcast Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in. Also, if you want to support this channel, we do have a Patreon. You can find the link to it in the description below. And also for our Patreon supporters, I'll be doing a live Q&A every Sunday. And also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. If you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about this channel as well. With that said, folks, again, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.